What do you remember about the about Preacher Lewis? Do you remember anything about him? Because weren't you part of the Episcopalian Church, or?
Well, he lived next door to Dr. Smith's family. They were very close. The whole family were very close to one another, and that's why I'm an Episcopalian, because Bob was, and so I knew he wouldn't go with me to the Methodist, so I went with him to the Episcopal.
and Preacher Lewis, Hunter Lewis, lived in Las Cruces. Is that correct?
And Messiah Park.
And Messiah Park.
Right there by the old church. That St. James is still there.
Yes, that's right.
Still.
And then he took the train when he came up. Is that how he made his rounds?
He did it by foot mostly. He just started out by foot. He wanted to go to Magdalena, and he'd get on the train and come to England. He had a free pass on the train. He could ride it anywhere. He'd come to, well, if he's going to Magdalena, though, he'd probably go on up to Socorro. Mm-hmm. And he just started out on the road afoot. Everybody knew him. He had 2 satchels that he carried, and always dressed in black, and so they'd stop and pick him up.
And
he'd walk a while and they'd say, well, but everybody knew who he was, and so they picked him up.
What did he do as he walked?
Oh yeah, he had some kind of something wrong with him when he was a child, so his sister taught him to knit, to do something with his hands. So he knitted a cap for every child that he baptized. So he had knitting in one bag and his church work in the other one. And when he'd get to a place, he'd sit down for a few minutes, he'd sit down and start knitting.
And at one time, I think he also, the Lake Valley Church was the congregational church up there, was part of his delegation as well.
The county is full of Episcopalians because, they were, because he'd just get anywhere he was, he'd just have a service. And he was quite a musician. He had a good voice. He could sing good, and he could play the organ or the piano, whatever. He'd play the organ, they'd have a service, and then he'd sit down and play for the dance.
What do you recollect about Sadie Orchard? Did she ever go to the dances that Preacher Lewis played at? Sadie Orchard?
Now, she was a little before my time.
But she died in 1943.
Yeah, I knew who she was, and I knew when she came here. But she was out of her glory by that time. She was getting to be old, She's quite a character. I have her book over there, and she did her good. They drove the mail hack, I think, from Lake Valley to Hillsborough. She went part of the time, and I guess she had a house of ill repute, but I don't know that to be a fact.
Well, in 1918, you would have been about 2 years old, right?
In 1918, I'm 4.
You were 4 years old. Okay. So, what do you recollect about that great influenza that came through, the influenza that killed so many?
About the 18th?
Uh-huh.
Alrighty, that my 2 brothers came for Christmas that year. And I don't know whether they brought the flu, but the flu went through the whole family. Everybody had it but me, and I was between 4 and 5 years old. First time I was ever sent to town by myself. But I went to town to tell Dr. White to stop by. So the sweet shop was right there, so I go in the sweet shop and I order a ice cream cone. So as I'm backing out the door, I said, "Georgia." They never collected that bill.
As I was backing out the door, I said, "Charge it."
And I didn't know I'd done anything wrong. My sister was always going in there and saying, "Charge it." They had a Georgia account, so I figured I had one too, you know. So we got Dr. White. We all lived through it. They all lived through it. I never did get it. I was a toughie, and they used to call me that part. I didn't like it.
You were a toughie, yeah. You still are a toughie.
So that's what I remember about the.
About the influenza of 1918 then.
Yeah.
So your whole family survived. Well, that's good. Oh,
So I guess Dr. White did, and Cecil drove for Dr. White at that time.
oh, we did.
You know, while Dr. White was asleep from one, because he had the whole county to take care of. And so I have a picture of Dr. White I got to show you.
You like to see it?
Oh, what do you have?
Huh?
So what's next?
Bonner and Darish killings. What do you remember about Hart Darish and Ernest Bonner when they had the shootout at the Pine Knot?
I don't remember. I wasn't active in that.
1951. You weren't active in that in 1951.
In 1951,
She didn't go to the Pine Knot.
I didn't go to the Pine Knot.
I remember they had. I don't think I've ever been in the Pine Knot.
Well, we're going to have to take you sometime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not that I'm too good, but just didn't happen to go there.
Yeah, we'll have to take you some night when there's a dance. We'll,
Yeah.
we'll kick up our heels. Did you ever go to the dances at Lake Valley?
No, but I would have liked to have gone to the dance tonight.
Did you ever go to the dances here in town?
Not a great deal. My mother was so against those. Now, not for me, because I wasn't old enough, but I would hear her and the older sisters fussing about it so much. She was so against it. They were pretty devout Presbyterians. They came over from the old country as Presbyterian ministers. And I guess they never did, you know, maybe we need a lot more. Anyway, I danced. And that's, in fact, that's where I met Bob at Silver Slipper, not the Silver Slipper.
Uh-huh.
And he
Now
didn't
we
like dancing, and I didn't like him much either, but that's where I met him.
So you met him at the Silver Slipper.
Huh?
You met him at the Silver Slipper.
I sure did.
And what year was that?
1935. I met him in February, and we married in October. Neither one of us had a dime. I had a job, and he had been promised in the CC camp. They decided to close up and think more about war. And I was working for the welfare at that time. And so we just decided, we'd been talking about it a long time, we'd been talking about it, and I guess something come up about him not getting it, and he was kind of low about not getting the CC camp. And, well, let's just go get married. People didn't live together before marriage at that time.
Right. That's exactly right.
Well, at that time, was Ashbaw's there, or was Silver Slipper the main?
Pardon?
Was Ashbaw's nightclub at this time,
I think
or was
it was just before they moved to town. You know, they were out at Palomas for a while.
Ah.
Remember where you went through that creek?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Before they moved to town. And I think the Silver Slipper, I believe, was the only one.
And about what? See, that had to have been what, in the 40s then, didn't it? Was that about, when did you marry Bob?
35.
I met him in February. We married in October.
What year?
35.
35. So okay. So how many bars were downtown, or was Silver Slipper just about
I
it?
never went in. The only one I remember at that time, because we were always going in to get an enchilada, was, I think they called it the New Zealand. It's where the museum is now.
New Zealand.
And the Edgewoods. You remember the Edgewoods? Remember? What's the boy's name? Well, anyway,
I don't-
they were running it. And we used to go in there when I worked for the welfare. We were always going there to get an enchilada.
Do you remember the Palace? The Palace? The Palace Bar? The Buckhorn?
Oh, the Buckhorn was always there.
And was the Buckhorn something called something else before?
Mother always insisted we walk down the other side of the street.
And why was that?
Well, maybe a man would jump out and grab you when you came out of the door. When I worked in the telephone office, they'd call for the sheriff. And you mean Bill Sullivan? Yeah. Yeah, Bill Sullivan. Can you get a hold of him for us? You know, when at that time you just worked in it, you just talked to anything. Well, I just saw him go in the Buckhorn a few minutes ago. Well, ring them. I'm sorry, they don't have a telephone.
That's great.
What about when gambling was going so big in town?
Well, I wasn't a gambler, so I didn't know anything about that.
What about Pop Mim's indictments?
About what?
About Pop Mim's indictments with the one-armed bandits. You know what a one-armed bandit is?
Yeah, a slot machine. Well,
Yeah.
they didn't have those at that time, did they? I don't remember those until about the time the war was. Did they have them before?
I don't know.
Well, we're asking you.
I remember them having trouble trying to get them in the VFW, and Bob was commander down there, and he called Meacham. He grew up with the Meacham boys, and Bob called him. Bob was trying to get it where they could. Oh, Ed told him, well, you know, that's against the law, and they're the ones that are supposed to be keeping it. If it wasn't against the law, I would be for it, but it's against the law, so I'm not for it. So you can't do anything about it.
So that was in the VFWs with the one-armed
Yeah,
bandits.
that was a VFW when they were coming in that basement thing down.
And that was over there, what, on Van Patten Street? Was that the VFW you're talking about? Or
The
was
one that had the basement.
the Curry? The Curry, was it the Curry?
Yeah,
Yeah, that was over there on Van Patten, so.
well, Governor Curry, you know, was quite a favorite around here. He died here, I guess.
And about what year was that? That was in the Currys or what, in the
don't remember.
30s?
I think it was a little
What?
late. Governor Curry. When did he die? Was it in the 30s or the 40s?
Well, Mom went to the funeral, and I don't, so it must have been in the 40s.
I think that's right.
It must have been after the war. I don't know. But I know Bob went to the funeral. And so